giving me this opportunity to tell you about what I would call a success story, a story of what my country has been able to do and what we plan to do for the future in a few minutes. I'll try to be brief, and then I think there's some questions and answers. We were talking with Tom. He was in the State Department and helped draft Plan Colombia back in the early 90s, early 2000, the year 2000, as a matter of fact. I was Minister of Finance, and we were on the verge of being declared a failed state. That's why Plan Colombia was designed. From then on, we made a tremendous effort to reestablish the strength of our institutions, of our democracy, and try to get rid of terrorism, drug trafficking, and to get the economy growing again. And today we can proudly say that we have achieved almost all of the objectives that were set back then. And especially in the last years, we have been able to make tremendous progress. People say, what is the secret? How have you done this, or how has Colombia been able to do this? And there's a series of factors that have to be present, a series of conditions. The first one is one that unfortunately in not many countries around the world you can find, is governability, the ability to govern, to reach consensus or agreements with Congress, with the judiciary, and as Roosevelt used to say, to put the democracy working in one direction. He used to say that democracy is like three old bulls that have to plow, and they have to walk in the same direction. Well, I remember that example, and I remember another example from another great American president, Abraham Lincoln. So the first thing I did when I won the elections 4 years ago was to do the same thing that Lincoln did, is ask my rivals to become part of the government. And they all said yes. And so that gave me a working coalition, a very ample working coalition, that allowed me to pass very necessary reforms in Colombia that were needed for a long, long time. What did these reforms try to achieve? I had very clearly drawn the objectives that we wanted. And those objectives I have confirmed as my vision for Colombia in my inauguration speech that were peace, equality, and good education. A country in peace with more equality and better education. But in order to do that, to achieve that, you need a set of conditions. One of them is have a strong economy, an economy that grows fast and that can create jobs. And so many of the reforms were geared towards that objective, to get the economy growing at a high rate and to join or to create a virtuous circle whereby you have lower fiscal deficit or fiscal equilibrium, which will allow you to reduce your cost of money, that will allow you to have more money to spend in the economy and in the social indicator, the social policies. That will create more growth, that will create more tax revenue, and so you have that virtuous circle. We approved a lot of reforms geared towards that objective. And we have been able to achieve that virtuous circle. Today, Colombia is the #1 country in the whole of Latin America in terms of growth. We grew in the first quarter 6.4%. That is the second highest in the whole world after China. In the second quarter, we grew 4.3%. That makes it, in the first half of this year, 5.2%, the third highest growth in the whole world after China and Indonesia, the highest in Latin America, the highest in the OCDE, where we are trying to join. But the growth by itself really doesn't mean a lot. You need a healthy growth and growth to reach social objectives. And that's what we have also been doing in the last 4 years. Because the reforms were not only economic reforms, they were social reforms. Growth by itself, I repeat, is not sufficient. You need growth for something, to give more opportunities to the people. And so we also have had many reforms approved in Congress with social objectives that allowed us to have a tremendous improvement in our social indicators. And I say that growth had to be a healthy growth because it is a growth with low inflation. We had the lowest inflation of all of Latin America last year. A growth that created jobs, because many times you have growth but no job creation. In the case of Colombia, we created more than 2.5 million jobs, and for the first time, formal jobs, but especially growth that did not increase the inequality of the country, but started to reduce that inequality. So we put in place reforms to fight poverty and fight extreme poverty. And in the last 4 years, we managed to take out of poverty more than 3.6 million people. That is a decrease in poverty of almost 10% in 4 years. This is something that few countries in the world have been able to do that in such a short amount of time. But more importantly even is the extreme poverty. We took out more than 2 million people out of extreme poverty, which allowed us to reduce extreme poverty to less than 10% of our population. And that, for the first time, allowed us to start reducing the inequality. So a more equal country is the objective, and we are advancing towards that direction. But throughout this period, and even many decades before, we have had a chain in our throats stopping us from growing at a faster rate, from having more opportunity, which is a war that we have been fighting for 50 years. 5-0. It's the oldest armed conflict and the only one left in the Western Hemisphere. And so one of the objectives, as I said at the beginning, that I put myself was also reach peace. But to reach peace, you need a set of conditions that were not present in any of the intents of reaching peace with our enemies, or the FARC, the guerrillas, in past attempts. What were those conditions? You need to change the correlation of military forces. The state needs to have the upper hand. Otherwise, there will be no conditions for peace. You need to convince the head of the organization that is fighting you or you're fighting them that peace is a better business, better opportunity. And in today's world, you need the international community in your side. We did not have those conditions before, but we created those conditions slowly. We started with Plan Colombia back in the year 2000, and we were able to change the military forces. When I came into government, we changed the way that our military and intelligence apparatus operated, and we started hitting high-value targets in the enemy camp, and that convinced them that it's better to have a peace agreement than to continue with their war. And we made a dramatic change in the way we relate to our neighbors and to the world. And we managed to have the international community backing us in this peace effort. And we sat down and started a peace process. We established an agenda, which is 50% of any peace process in anywhere in the world. The agenda is very important. We already agreed to an agenda. And we have a five-point agenda. There are five items. We have agreed, we reach agreement on 3 of them. We need to reach agreement on 2 more. One of those points that we reach an agreement is an extremely important point for the U.S., for Plan Colombia, for the region, for the whole world. And we reach an agreement with the FARC to get rid of drug trafficking in Colombia, which was one of the objectives of Plan Colombia. And this is something that if we are able to finish these agreements and sign the agreements and deliver on the agreements, will be a tremendous change in the whole drug trafficking problems, not only of Colombia, but of the whole region and the world, because Colombia has been the principal provider of cocaine for the last 30 or 40 years. And this has already been agreed. We agreed also on a point of political participation, which is nothing different than opening up more our democracy. And we reached an agreement on rural development, which again is nothing that you would not do in today's world, to develop the rural areas where poverty and inequality is concentrated. What is left, the point on what you call transitional justice, how much justice are you willing to sacrifice for the sake of peace? This is a key issue, and we're starting to negotiate that point. And the last point is what they call DDR, how to disarm, demobilize, and reintegrate. And if we reach an agreement on those 2 points, the war will come to an end. And I'm quite confident that it will come to an end. But the strong economy is also a precondition for peace and for a sustainable peace. And this is something that the world should take careful notice of. If we reach peace, but don't give opportunities to the young people, not only the people who are in arms, but the young people in general, to maintain the peace is difficult. You see many countries in Central America. The crime rate there is the highest in the world. What is happening there? Lack of opportunities of the young children. Even if you go to the other side of the world, because now they say Colombia is a success story on this side of the world, the Western Hemisphere, but look at the other side of the world, the Middle East, the fanatism, the jihad. There you also need to take into account the economic factors. Many of the young kids that go to these fanatic groups, terrorist groups, Many go because they lack opportunities. The lack of opportunities breeds resentment, breeds hatred, and so there is always a social economic component, even in the fight against terrorism. And we consider our enemies also terrorists. We have been labeling them as terrorists for many, many years, but we also are conscious that the economic aspect plays a fundamental role in achieving peace. So we already managed to get into the virtuous circle of the economy, a very strong economy. This year, the International Monetary Fund is the only country in Latin America that is going to grow more than last year is Colombia. The rest will probably grow, they say, less. Our perspectives of high growth are good. If we reach peace, all the studies say that Colombia will increase the growth rate by at least 2% per year forever. So if the calculations of our growth this year is 5%, we will then go in on track of 7%, which is very high growth even by Asian standards. So this is the possibility that we have if we reach this peace agreement. And fortunately, I'm here at the United Nations getting a lot of support from the international community to push for the peace process. It's a peace process that, in a way, is going to set a precedent for many other conflicts in the world, because we are the first country to negotiate a peace process under the umbrella of the Treaty of Rome. So whatever we do will be an example and will set a precedent for other conflicts. So there's a tremendous interest in how we are going to deal with this conflict and how are we going to negotiate a peace agreement. I am confident that we will reach an agreement. We have had the support of everybody, quite frankly, all countries, no matter their ideology. Our neighbors, Venezuela and Cuba, are helping us. Cuba is hosting the negotiations, but the U.S. is helping us, Europe is helping us, because they know that the consequences of peace for the world, for the U.S., for Europe, for the whole region, are extremely, extremely positive. The big challenge now is to continue this high growth, to continue strengthening our democracy and strengthening our institutions. And that's where education comes in. Remember, I mentioned at the beginning, peace, equality, and education. And so we are giving education a tremendous importance in every single decision that we're taking, because that's, in the long run, what will enable us, first of all, to continue the path towards more equality. There's no better way to feed equality than to educate the people and give them all the best education possible. We made the public education completely free for every kid in Colombia, every boy and girl from kindergarten to the 11th grade. It's a tremendous fiscal effort, but I think it's very worthwhile. We're giving a tremendous importance for the first time to early childhood, because that's where inequality starts. If you abandon a kid between the time he is born and when he goes to school, if he's not well fed, he's not well taken care of, that's where the inequality starts. So investing in early childhood is probably the most profitable investment socially that any society can do. So we're making a tremendous effort there, and we're making a tremendous effort in expanding the opportunities for higher education. The goal, I told my people that we should try to attain, is to be the best educated country in Latin America by the year 2025. We have to work hard, very hard, but if you don't have high goals, you will never reach them. So if we are able to finish this peace process successfully and continue with a strong economy, and that's a big challenge. You all know that economic cycles are almost as guaranteed as taxes and death, but how to handle those economic cycles, maintain fiscal discipline. We were one of the first countries to introduce in our Constitution the concept of fiscal responsibility. Why did we do this? Because when I was Minister of Finance, I discovered that probably the most the phenomenon that violates more the basic human rights is an economic crisis, because you have to tighten your belt and lower the budget on education, on health, on security, and the people suffer. So the best investment you can have to guarantee human rights is to have a sound economy, and the basis for a sound economy is fiscal responsibility. That was a great discussion in the Colombian Congress and the Colombian Constitutional Court, defending the right as a fundamental right, the fiscal responsibility, the concept of fiscal responsibility as a right, like a right to free speech, or the right to health or to education, and we won. And today this is an example for many countries that are following our example to avoid the type of crisis that we have been seeing in Europe, even here in the US, and many countries around the Latin American region. So Colombia is going in, I think, in the right direction. We have a long way to go yet, but our fundamentals are very solid. Our democracy is getting stronger, and if we reach peace, it will be even stronger. Of course, democracies have to adapt themselves to new circumstances. Politics is an ever-changing phenomena. You have the pendulum effect that we have to administer with intelligence, but I think that the conditions are set to continue on the right path. With the U.S., we have an extremely good relationship. We consider ourselves strategic partners of the U.S., and the U.S. considers themselves strategic partners of Colombia. Before the agenda, when Tom was in the State Department 20 years ago, the agenda was drug trafficking, violation of human rights, and nothing else. Now it's cooperation in technology, education, health service, how to get together to help other countries. For example, we are doing that right now, help countries in Central America fight the drug cartels or fight drug trafficking, how to work together to have a cleaner environment. And those are the types of topics that are now relevant in the bilateral agenda. The free trade agreement with the U.S. is working very well. Trade is going up and up. Investment in Colombia is also one of the highest, or the highest in all of Latin America. And this is also a guarantee that our growth rate will continue to be high. Probably the biggest challenge, as anywhere in the world, is to maintain the governability. and maintain the coalition, because politics has a lot to do with good economic performance, and if you allow politics to destroy the economy, to get it up again is costly and difficult, but if you use politics to maintain the economy in good shape, that's a very good way to proceed. I think we have the conditions to continue in that path, and we need is to continue attracting investment. Colombia is still a country to be exploited, conquered in the correct sense of the word. Have tremendous resources, tremendous capital, human capital, and tremendous opportunities. And that's why I am here to speak to you in this Harvard Club. I remember when I went to Harvard University twice, first at the Kennedy School to do my master's, then as an Nieman Fellow. They were the best years of my life. I learned a lot. Many of the things I learned, I'm applying now as president. Thank you, Harvard. Thank you.